The last time Clara Whitmore touched a piano key, it was raining. Not the soft, movie kind of rain, but the kind that made the whole world feel heavy. The kind that blurred city lights and soaked everything before you could even pull your jacket tight. That night, she had a performance. Not just any recital, her final solo before Juilliard auditions. The pressure was unreal. But she'd done this 100 times before. And then the accident happened. It took 5 seconds. A distracted driver, a flashing light she never saw, a crash that changed everything. She didn't remember much about the impact, just glass, screaming metal, her father shouting her name. Then silence, the kind of silence that felt permanent. Clara had always been a prodigy, the girl with fire in her fingers, they used to say. She could play Chopin blindfolded at 9. She once made a hardened music critic cry in front of an entire theatre. At 17, she was supposed to be untouchable. But now she was in a wheelchair. No sensation below the waist, no music, no light, no purpose. It had been 6 months. The mansion was quiet these days. No more piano echoing through the halls. No tutors, no agents, no friends. Just her and the sterile hum of medical machines her father had installed in the East Wing. He tried everything. Doctors, private therapists, even some neurology expert flown in from Zurich. But none of it reached her. None of it mattered. Clara didn't want to be fixed. She didn't want anything at all. She just sat by the window in her oversized hoodie and stared. At the rain, at the street, at the life she used to have. Sometimes she imagined her fingers moving over invisible keys, but the music never came. And her father, Harold Whitmore, CEO, billionaire, empire builder, he had no idea how to save the one thing that mattered most to him, his daughter. He watched her fade more each day, until one morning, without asking, he made a decision. He closed his laptop, cancelled 3 meetings, called in a favour from an old friend, and hours later, without warning, he wheeled Clara into the back of a black SUV and said just 4 words. "We're going somewhere quiet." She didn't ask where, she didn't care. But far from the city, beyond the signal towers and the noise and the mirrors of her old life, someone was waiting. Someone who didn't see her as a lost cause. And the road that led her there was winding, cold and quiet, just like her. The road got bumpier after the last gas station. There were no signs, no street names, just pine trees pressing in on either side of the SUV, and a sky that looked like it hadn't made up its mind about whether it wanted to rain again. Clara didn't ask where they were going, she just stared at the blur of green outside the window. One hand curled loosely in her lap, the other tugging at the sleeve of her hoodie. Her father sat beside her silent. For a man who usually filled rooms with his voice, he hadn't said a word in over an hour. The SUV climbed higher into the hills until the trees finally opened up, revealing a clearing and a lodge. Willow Ridge Recovery Lodge, the faded sign read. It wasn't a hospital, not even close. More like an old wooden camp that had been cleaned up just enough to pass for a place people might come willingly. A porch swing creaked in the breeze. A few cabins stood off to the side, tucked between trees. It smelled like pine and smoke and something warm, like bread, or maybe cinnamon. Clara looked unimpressed. "Is this a joke?" she mumbled. Her father didn't answer. A young woman in hiking boots opened the lodge door and waved with a clipboard. "You must be the Whitmores. Welcome to Willow Ridge." Clara didn't return the smile. She hated when people spoke in that slow, careful tone, like they were already assuming she was fragile. They wheeled her inside, past a fireplace, through a common room where 2 older women were doing Tai Chi, and a man with a prosthetic leg was laughing with someone over a chessboard. It didn't feel like a clinic, it felt human. That made Clara uncomfortable. Her room was simple. A bed, a desk, a large window that faced the trees. No screens, no machines, just quiet. Too quiet. Later that afternoon, as she sat staring out the window, she heard a knock on her open door. A small voice followed. "Hi, you look bored." Clara turned. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, stood there with dirt on his jeans and a stick in his hand like it was a sword. His face was round, freckled, with big, curious eyes. He had no business being this confident. "My name's Theo," he said. "My dad says people come here to get better. He helped my leg after Mum died. He can help you too." Clara blinked. "I'm not here for help." Theo just shrugged. "That's what most people say, at first." Then he turned and walked off, like he hadn't just thrown a stone straight into the centre of her still dark pond. Clara looked back out the window. She didn't smile, but something small, so small it could barely be felt, shifted behind her ribs. A name stuck in her head. My dad. Whoever he was, Clara already hated him, because somehow, without even meeting her, he'd gotten under her skin. The next morning, Clara was already awake when someone knocked on her door. It wasn't a soft knock, not the gentle tiptoeing kind she'd gotten used to from nurses and aides. It was 3 solid knocks, like whoever was out there wasn't afraid of her silence. She didn't answer. The door creaked open anyway. "I figured I'd introduce myself," a calm, steady voice said. "I'm Eli, Theo's dad." Clara didn't look up from her window. She could hear the footsteps, slow, deliberate. She imagined a clipboard, a fake smile, some over-rehearsed line like, "We're here to help you heal." But when the footsteps stopped, there was no speech, just quiet, and then a chair dragging gently across the floor. He sat. Still, she didn't look. "Look," he said after a moment, "I'm not going to pretend I know what to say. I don't do pep talks. I'm not here to fix you." Clara raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I'm not a doctor," he continued. "Used to be a physical therapist. Then life happened. Now I just work here." That caught her off guard a little. She glanced at him just for a second. He wasn't what she expected. Mid-40s maybe, worn in flannel shirt, jeans, scuffed boots. No clipboard, no lab coat, just real. Eli leaned back in the chair. "I usually wait until people talk first, but Theo said you looked like someone who doesn't like to be talked down to. So, here I am, talking, hoping I'm not wasting your time." Clara finally turned toward him. "You are," she said flatly. He smiled, not smug, not hurt, just human. "That's fair," he said, standing up. "Well, I'll be around. If you ever want to throw something heavy or punch a pillow, I'm your guy." And with that he left. No awkward silence, no checking her vitals, no speech about positive thinking. Just left her alone, exactly what she said she wanted. But somehow, she hated it less when he did it. Later that day, she caught herself watching Theo from her window. The boy was chasing a paper airplane, tripping, laughing. Eli sat nearby, whittling a piece of wood, glancing up now and then. They looked ordinary, like people who had no idea what real pain felt like. Except Clara had a feeling they did. She just didn't know how much, yet. The next few days passed slowly. Clara stuck to her routine. Wake up late, avoid people, stare out the window. The lodge had no Wi-Fi, no TV, no distractions. Just her and the sound of wind through trees. It was like someone had hit pause on the entire world. Eli didn't push. He didn't show up with worksheets or motivational quotes. He didn't ask how she felt or if she was ready to try walking again. Instead, he just existed nearby. Sometimes she'd catch glimpses of him helping other residents. A woman relearning how to grip a fork. A man practicing slow, careful steps between 2 railings. Eli never raised his voice. He didn't cheer or clap or fake excitement. He just stayed close, present. That bothered Clara more than she expected. One afternoon, she was wheeling herself back to her room when she heard music. Soft, low, real. She followed the sound, curious in spite of herself, and found Eli alone in the main room, sitting at a weathered upright piano. His fingers weren't polished. He hit a wrong note here and there, but he kept going, slow, unhurried, like he wasn't trying to impress anyone. Clara stayed in the doorway. "That's not how you play Debussy," she said without thinking. Eli stopped playing and turned around, surprised but not offended. "No kidding," he said. "You any good?" She rolled her eyes. "I used to be." He nodded slowly, then patted the bench beside him. "Well, I'm awful. Want to correct me?" She didn't move. He shrugged and stood. "Okay, then take the bench. I'll leave it open, no pressure." Then he walked away. No guilt trip, no lingering look, just the soft sound of his boots retreating down the hall. Clara sat in the doorway for a long time, staring at the empty piano bench. Her hands twitched slightly in her lap. That night, she dreamed of her old studio, the smell of the mahogany keys, the echo of applause after a solo, her fingers dancing without thought or fear. She woke up before the music finished. The next morning, when no one was around, she wheeled herself into that room. The piano was still there, dusty, slightly out of tune, waiting. She didn't sit down, but she reached out, slowly, hesitantly, and touched the edge of one key. It didn't make a sound, but inside something cracked open just a little. Eli didn't mention the piano the next day, or the day after that. And that, more than anything, was what kept Clara from retreating again. He didn't ask if she touched the keys. He didn't ask what she used to play. He just kept showing up the same way he always did. Steady, quiet, never hovering. One morning, Clara rolled out to the porch after breakfast. The air smelled like pine and old wood, and the mist was just starting to lift from the hills. She figured she'd be alone. She liked it that way. But Eli was already there, sanding down a piece of driftwood. He looked up. Didn't peg you as a morning person. She shrugged. Didn't peg you as someone who whittles. He grinned. I don't. But Theo said this piece of wood looks like a spaceship, so now I'm apparently making a spaceship. She didn't laugh, but her mouth twitched just a little, almost a smile. They sat in silence for a while, not awkward, just still. Then Eli said, You know, healing isn't always about muscle. Clara didn't respond, so he kept talking. Soft, no pressure. Sometimes it's about remembering who you were before it all broke, and letting yourself want that person back. She looked straight ahead. What if that person's gone? Then maybe, Eli said, we stop looking for the person, and just listen for the parts that are still alive. She looked over at him. That's supposed to be deep? He shrugged. Not really, just true. Later that afternoon, he invited her to the community room, not for therapy, for music. There were a few residents sitting in a loose circle. No exercises, no speeches. Just a woman humming softly, a guy tapping his fingers against a drum, someone else strumming a guitar out of tune. No one cared about mistakes. No one was watching her. Eli handed her a small wooden chime. Not a piano, he said, but still makes a sound. She took it without a word. For 15 minutes, she didn't think about her legs, or hospitals, or the future that got ripped away. She just listened, let herself be in the middle of something again. That night, she went back to the piano room, alone, again. She rolled to the bench, lifted the cover, and stared at the keys. She pressed one. It was sharp, a little too loud, but it was music. She played another, then another. Her fingers were stiff, clumsy. The melody in her head didn't match what came out, but still, she kept going. She didn't cry, but she didn't stop either. Outside the door, unseen, Eli stood in the hallway. He didn't interrupt. He just listened, one note at a time. The next morning, Clara found the piano bench already pulled out. Someone had left a folded piece of paper on the keys. It wasn't a letter, just a hand-drawn floor plan. Her old studio. Not exactly, but close enough. The grand piano by the window. The placement of the mirror wall. Even the rug her teacher used to call the only soft thing in this whole room. Every detail sketched by hand. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers tracing the lines. Later that day, Eli found her on the porch again. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that said, "Best dad ever." Probably Theo's doing. Finally he spoke. I figured, maybe your body remembers better when your heart feels safe. Clara didn't look at him. You've been talking to my dad. Nope, Eli said. I've been watching you. And listening. You hum when you're distracted. Same 4 notes. Same rhythm. Took me a while to realise it's from Debussy's Clair de Lune. Her eyes flicked toward him. He smiled, then held up a photo, grainy, printed on regular paper. It was Clara, maybe 12 years old, seated at a piano on stage, mid-performance. The look on her face wasn't joy exactly, it was something deeper, like she was someplace only she could go. Someone mailed that to the lodge a few days ago, Eli said. No return address. Clara knew immediately, her father, of course. I'm not trying to get inside your head, Eli continued. I just thought maybe we could try something. She waited. He stood, reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded swatch of deep red velvet. The same colour as the seat cushion in your old studio, right? Her eyes widened just slightly. I found a guy in town who reupholsters stuff. We could fix the bench, maybe hang some long mirrors, nothing big, but enough that it feels like you. She didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. That evening, she wheeled into the piano room and found the beginnings of something different. One corner of the room had been cleared. A long piece of mirror leaned against the wall. A soft rug had been unrolled under the pedals, and the bench, now covered in that same familiar velvet, sat waiting. She didn't cry, but when she sat down and placed her hands on the keys, she closed her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken. She felt like someone remembering how to come home. Harold Whitmore wasn't used to waiting. He built an empire off precision, timelines, and plans. If something broke, you hired someone to fix it. If someone got in your way, you went around them. But nothing had prepared him for his daughter being silent in a wheelchair, grieving a life neither of them could rebuild. So when the staff at Willow Ridge told him not to interfere, not to push, not to expect updates for a while, he nearly left, but he didn't. Something about Eli's eyes and the way Clara looked at him without flinching made Harold pause. He returned a week later. No press, no security, just him. The first thing he noticed was the sound. Piano. Soft, unsure notes drifting down the hallway. He followed the sound like a trail of light through a house that had been dark too long. Through the open door he saw her, Clara, back straight, hair tied up, fingers hovering carefully over the keys. Her left foot still resting on the chair's footplate, but her right leg was gently moving, twitching, responding. Eli sat nearby, not instructing, not coaching, just watching. Quiet, steady. Like the way you watch someone come back from underwater. Harold stepped in. Clara paused. Her hands froze. For a moment the room felt colder. "I didn't know you were coming," she said without looking at him. "I wanted to see you." Eli stood, giving Harold a nod. "I'll give you 2 a minute." "No," Clara said quickly. "You can stay." Harold blinked. He wasn't used to being the one gently dismissed. "I see you've been playing again," he said carefully. She didn't reply. He looked around, the mirror, the rug, the velvet bench. All familiar, all from her old life, but rearranged, softer somehow. "Did you request all this?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "Eli did. He listens." There it was. Not said with cruelty, just truth, sharp and quiet. "I've tried everything, Clara," Harold said, his voice cracking at the edges. "Doctors, clinics, overseas specialists. I know," she interrupted, "but no one ever asked what I missed, not until now." He stepped back a little, like her honesty physically moved him. "You wanted to fix me," she continued, "but I wasn't broken, I was just lost and tired of being seen like a problem." Harold looked at Eli, who didn't gloat or smirk, just nodded once, almost like he'd been there too. "I don't know how to help," Harold finally said. "You already are," Clara replied, her voice softer now. "By letting go." Outside, the wind picked up through the trees. Inside, the piano waited. Clara turned back to it and placed her fingers on the keys again. This time, her right foot pressed ever so gently into the floor. It didn't hold her weight. But it remembered. And for now, that was enough. The leaves had started turning. It was mid-October, and the path behind the retreat was blanketed in orange and gold. Most mornings were chilly, quiet, peaceful, the kind that made you want to sip coffee slowly and forget about the world. Clara didn't forget, not about the pain, or the accident, or the people who stared too long and said too little. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt like a ghost in her own story. Eli called it getting back into your skin. That morning, Clara wheeled herself into the sunroom without being asked. She wore a simple sweater and leggings, not pajamas, not hospital gowns. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and she had that look in her eyes again. Not fire exactly, but something awake. "Ready?" Eli asked, standing beside the therapy bars. She didn't answer, she just nodded once. Her father was there too, standing quietly by the window. No briefcase, no bodyguards, just a man holding his breath. Eli positioned the wheelchair, locked it, then offered his arm, not as a crutch but as reassurance. Clara grabbed the parallel bars. Her hands trembled, but her grip held. 1 foot forward, her right leg shook, then the left, then another, and another. By the 5th step, her breath was shallow, her knees buckled slightly. She stopped, not from pain, from overwhelm. And just like that, her legs gave out. But she didn't fall hard. Eli was there. He caught her mid-sink, lowering her gently to the padded mat nearby, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. "I'm sorry," she gasped, frustrated. "Don't be," he said, crouching beside her. "You just walked 5 steps more than yesterday." Her father exhaled, loudly. It wasn't dramatic, it was relief. Clara looked up at him. "I fell." "You stood," he replied. The air in the room thickened, not from sadness, from pride. Eli reached over and handed her a towel, then held her hand for just a second longer than necessary. "You good?" he asked. Clara wiped the sweat from her brow and let out a shaky laugh. "No, but I'm getting there." Later that afternoon, she returned to the piano. Her fingers played gently, notes full of imperfection and promise. She didn't care how it sounded, it was hers again. Outside, the trees swayed like they'd been listening the whole time. The sky was soft that evening, streaked with lavender and pale gold as the sun dipped behind the pines. Clara wheeled herself to the porch just after dinner, a warm blanket over her legs and a notebook resting in her lap. She wasn't writing music, not yet, but sometimes scribbling thoughts felt like touching the keys. She wasn't alone. Adam's son, Noah, sat cross-legged a few feet away, his arms wrapped around his knees, a quiet look in his eyes that Clara had grown used to. He didn't speak much unless something mattered. After a long silence, he asked without looking up, "Do you miss it?" Clara blinked. "What?" "Music being you." She let out a breath. "Yeah, I miss the version of me who could play for hours without thinking about her legs. I miss walking across the stage and not feeling afraid." Noah nodded slowly. "I used to miss my mum like that." Clara turned toward him. "I didn't know." He shrugged. "She passed when I was 5. Car crash. Just me and Dad now." She didn't say "I'm sorry." Noah didn't like those words. Instead she said, "You're strong." He cracked a tiny smile. "Dad says I'm resilient. I had to look it up." Clara chuckled. "Big word." They sat in silence again, the kind that didn't feel heavy. Noah picked at the hem of his hoodie, then asked, "Why did you come here?" "My dad brought me," she said honestly. "He thought the mountains could fix what the doctors couldn't." "Did it work?" She paused, considering. Not like he hoped, but maybe in a different way. Noah nodded again, then looked over at her with something almost like admiration. "You don't seem broken." "I'm not," Clara said softly. "Just rebuilding." He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper. "I drew this." She opened it carefully. It was a sketch, simple but clear, of her sitting at the piano, a few musical notes floating above her head like stars. Clara's throat tightened. "It's not perfect," Noah said, suddenly shy. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Can I keep it?" He nodded, his cheeks pinking a little. "Yeah, it's yours." The sun dipped fully behind the trees. Crickets began their quiet chorus. Clara looked down at the drawing one more time, then folded it gently and slipped it into her notebook. A reminder, a keepsake. Proof that even if she wasn't on a stage, her music still reached people, even the small ones. The room wasn't much. Just the old chapel near the main lodge, used for group meditations or rainy day reading. But that night it held something sacred. A piano. Not a concert grand, just a scuffed upright pushed against the far wall. It had a few sticky keys and one pedal that squeaked, but none of that mattered. Clara rolled herself in slowly, heart pounding louder than any applause she used to hear. She wasn't wearing anything dramatic, just a soft blue blouse and black pants. But Adam had laid a single white flower on top of the piano. No stage, no crowd, just quiet faces she'd come to trust. Her dad, Adam, Noah, and a few other retreat guests who'd seen her before the steps, before the notes, before the hope. She turned to Adam, who simply nodded. "Play what feels right," he whispered. Clara scooted onto the bench herself. That alone brought tears to Charles Stanton's eyes. Not the music, not yet. Just the sight of his daughter moving onto a piano bench under her own strength. Clara closed her eyes. Her fingers hovered over the keys, shaky but ready, and then she played. It wasn't perfect. The tempo wandered, she missed a note or two, but no one breathed too loud, because every note felt like a confession, and every pause carried more power than a speech. The melody was something she had written when she was 13, before fame, before tours, before pain. She hadn't played it in years, but her hands remembered. So did her heart. When she finished, there was no clapping, just silence. And then Noah stood, quietly walked over and hugged her. "Best concert I've ever heard," he mumbled. Clara let out a choked laugh. Her father came next. He didn't say anything, just kissed her forehead and held her like the world finally made sense again. Adam waited till last. "You did it," he said, crouching beside her. She looked down at her fingers. "No, we did it." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. It didn't feel like an ending, it felt like page 1 of a brand new chapter. Later that night, Clara tucked Noah's drawing into the lid of the piano. A reminder of where she began again. Because healing doesn't come with applause or awards. It comes with one step, one note, one person who refuses to give up on you until you stop giving up on yourself. And when she closed the piano lid, she smiled, not because it was over, but because it had truly begun. You know, this story really stuck with me. Not because it was dramatic or flashy, but because it felt real. It reminded me that healing doesn't always come in hospitals or headlines. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it looks like a kid's drawing or a piano played off key, but it's still healing. And maybe that's the point. We don't need to be perfect to start again. We just need people who see us, even when we can't see ourselves yet. If this story meant something to you, even just a little, Drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one of them. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next video, right here on Rain Inside. Take care and be kind to yourself.